I am 59 years old now, and I never imagined that I would still be carrying a wound that began with love. My name is Emily. For most of my life, I believed trust was the strongest thing a marriage could have. I believed if you loved deeply enough, faithfully enough, everything else would fall into place. I was wrong. The most shocking moment of my life didn't come with shouting or fists or police lights. It came quietly, years later, when I stood in the back of a church and watched my husband marry another woman, knowing my body had been broken because I believed his words. The memory still burns like it happened yesterday. I remember sitting in my living room, hands folded over my stomach, when he told me we couldn't keep the pregnancy. His voice was calm, practiced, almost gentle. He talked about bills, debt, the future, and fear. He said it wasn't the right time. He said we could try again later when money came. I trusted him because he was my husband, because love makes you blind in ways you don't understand until it's too late. But let me take you back before that moment, before everything cracked open. I grew up in a small American town where marriage was treated like a promise made in stone. My parents fought, but they stayed. My mother used to say, "Love means endurance." I carried that belief into adulthood like a badge of honor. When I met my husband, Richard, I thought God had finally rewarded my patience. He was charming, hardworking, and attentive. He made me feel chosen. When he asked me to marry him, I felt safe for the first time in my life. The early years weren't perfect, but they felt hopeful. We rented a modest apartment, shared cheap dinners, and talked about children like they were a certainty, not a question. I imagined baby names. I imagined a house with laughter in the hallway. Richard would smile and squeeze my hand, telling me we had time. A few minutes into this story, let me pause and ask you something. Where are you watching from right now? Are you listening from your living room, your car, or somewhere quiet? Please tell me in the comments, because knowing I'm not alone while sharing this matters more than you know. When I found out I was pregnant, I cried in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear me. They were happy tears. I pressed my palm against my belly and whispered promises to a life that had barely begun. When I told Richard, his face changed in a way I didn't recognize. Not anger, not joy, calculation. He sat down slowly and sighed like the weight of the world had just landed on his shoulders. He talked about layoffs at work, about rising rent, about how a baby deserved stability. He said bringing a child into struggle would be selfish. I argued weakly at first, then stronger. But he was steady, convincing, logical. He said, "Emily, trust me." And I did. The procedure changed more than my body. Something inside me never healed. Complications followed. Doctors spoke in careful tones. Words like damage and unlikely floated through sterile rooms. I held Richard's hand while my dreams slipped away. He promised we would face it together. Years passed. Money came just like he said it would. Bigger house, better car, comfortable life. But every conversation about children ended in silence. He stopped touching me the same way. I blamed myself. I blamed my body. I blamed fate. Then one afternoon, I found a receipt tucked inside his jacket pocket. A jewelry store. Not for me. My heart knew before my mind caught up. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He didn't even look ashamed. He said he wanted a family. He said he deserved children. He said I couldn't give him that. I remember standing there, feeling smaller than I ever had before. The betrayal wasn't just that he cheated. It was that he had planted the seed of my loss, then punished me for it. I realized in that moment that the choice I thought we made together had never truly been mine. The night I heard about his wedding date, I sat alone in my bedroom, staring at my reflection. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. I wondered how love could turn into something so cruel without ever raising its voice. And as I folded the invitation I never asked for, one question echoed in my mind, louder than anything else. Had my trust been the very thing that destroyed me? After Richard told me about the other woman, the world didn't explode the way I thought it would. There was no dramatic collapse. Instead, life continued in a quiet, almost mocking way. The sun still rose. Neighbors still waved. My phone still buzzed with messages that had nothing to do with the fact that my marriage was dying in front of my eyes. I moved back to my sister's house for a while. She lived across town in the same family home where we grew up. Walking into that house felt like stepping backward in time, except now I was carrying decades of regret instead of childhood dreams. My sister hugged me tightly, but I could feel her confusion. She had always admired Richard. Everyone had. He was the good husband, the man people used as an example. At dinner that first night, my mother kept glancing at me like she was afraid I might break apart if she asked the wrong question. My father cleared his throat too often. Finally, my sister asked what had happened. I told them everything. About the pregnancy, about the pressure, about the damage to my body, about the other woman. The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. Then my mother spoke, softly but firmly. She said maybe I should have pushed harder back then. Maybe I should have refused. She didn't mean to hurt me, but her words landed like blame. Old lessons echoed in my head. Love means endurance. Marriage means sacrifice. Suddenly, it felt like everyone believed I had sacrificed too much and still failed. Friends reacted differently. Some were angry on my behalf. Others suggested I forgive him, reminding me of how long we'd been together. One friend even said, "At least he was honest now." Honest now. As if honesty years too late could undo the damage. What hurt most was Richard's calmness. He moved on like a man following a plan he had written long ago. He said the other woman was younger. He said she understood his desire to be a father. He said he had waited as long as he could. Each sentence felt like another door closing behind me. I started replaying the past in my mind, looking for cracks I had ignored. The late nights, the distance, the way he avoided doctor appointments with me, the way he stopped talking about us and started talking about his future. I realized how carefully he had managed the truth, feeding me just enough hope to keep me compliant. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in my sister's attic, I found a journal I had kept years ago. Reading my younger self's words broke something open inside me. I had written about fear, about wanting to please my husband, about trusting him more than my own instincts. Page after page showed a woman slowly shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. That night, Richard called me. His voice was smooth, almost kind. He said the wedding was soon. He said he wanted things to be peaceful between us. He asked me not to cause problems. I realized then that he wasn't calling out of guilt. He was calling to manage me the same way he always had. I asked him one question. I asked if he had known, even back then, that ending the pregnancy could damage my body permanently. There was a pause, just a second too long. Then he said he hadn't been sure. That was enough. In that silence, I heard the truth louder than words. I hung up and sat on my sister's porch, watching the sky darken. For the first time, anger replaced shame. Not wild anger, but steady, grounding anger. I began to understand that my silence had protected him, not me. But the worst blow was still waiting. A few days later, I received a message meant for someone else. It was from Richard's phone, sent by mistake. A text filled with excitement about finally having everything planned and never telling Emily the real reason. My hands shook as I read it. There it was, proof that the story I had believed for years had been carefully rewritten to suit his needs. I stared at that message until my eyes burned, realizing my life had been shaped by a lie that began with love and ended in betrayal. Before this chapter ends, let me ask you something. What would you have done in my place when the man you trusted most asked you to give up something so precious? And have you ever seen something like this happen to someone you love? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I didn't sleep that night after reading the text message. I lay on my sister's couch staring at the ceiling, replaying every year of my marriage like a film I could no longer stop. The message kept flashing in my mind, especially the part about never telling Emily the real reason. It felt like someone had finally turned on the lights in a dark room I'd been living in for decades. By morning, something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was awake. I printed the message and folded it carefully, placing it in my purse like a fragile but powerful weapon. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to cry. I felt clear, calm, dangerous in a quiet way. I decided I would confront Richard, not to beg, not to plead, but to hear the truth from his own mouth. When I arrived at the house we once shared, the one I had decorated and cleaned and turned into a home, I noticed how different it felt. It no longer welcomed me. It stood there like a stranger, just like the man inside it. Richard opened the door with surprise written across his face. He hadn't expected me. He stepped aside anyway, still playing the role of the reasonable man. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where we once planned our future. I placed the folded paper between us and asked him to read it. His face tightened. He didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. Instead, he sighed and leaned back in his chair like a man tired of pretending. He admitted that he had known there was a risk. He admitted that he had already begun to resent me for wanting the baby when money was tight. He admitted that fear wasn't the only reason. He said he wasn't ready to be tied down by responsibility at that time. He said he wanted control. Hearing those words felt like being slapped and hugged at the same time. I asked him why he stayed with me afterward, why he let me believe we were still a team. His answer was simple and cruel. He said I was loyal. I was convenient. I made his life stable until he was ready for more. That was when I finally understood. Love had never been the center of our marriage. Comfort had. I stood up, my legs shaking, but my voice steady. I told him he didn't just take my chance at motherhood. He took my choice. He nodded, as if acknowledging a business deal that had gone wrong. That nod broke something inside me that had already been cracked for years. As I walked out, I realized how much of my life I had spent shrinking to keep peace. I had swallowed my doubts, silenced my instincts, and trusted someone who benefited from my obedience. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper, but also honest. The days that followed were heavy but strangely empowering. I started therapy. For the first time, I spoke freely without worrying about how my words would be received. I learned that trauma doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers and waits. I learned that betrayal doesn't always come dressed as hatred. Sometimes it comes wrapped in logic and patience. Richard's wedding day arrived faster than I expected. I didn't attend the ceremony, but photos still found their way to me. He looked proud. She looked young. Everyone looked happy. And for a brief moment, the old pain tried to return. The familiar voice whispered that I was replaceable, that my worth had expired. But then I remembered the text, the confession, the truth, and that voice lost its power. I realized something important. His new beginning did not mean my ending. My life had been paused, not erased. The damage to my body was real, but so was my strength. I began volunteering at a women's support group, listening to stories that echoed my own. Each story reminded me that silence is often taught, not chosen. One afternoon, a young woman at the group asked me how I survived such a deep betrayal. I told her the truth. I said I survived by finally choosing myself, by accepting that love without honesty is not love at all, by understanding that trust should never require self-destruction. That night I sat alone with a cup of tea, reflecting on everything I had lost and everything I was slowly reclaiming. I knew the final confrontation with Richard was not over, not in my heart. There were still words unsaid, boundaries unspoken. A final truth that needed to be voiced, not for him, but for me. And as I looked at my reflection in the window, I promised myself something I had never promised before. I would never again abandon my own voice to keep someone else comfortable. Before this chapter ends, let me ask you, what would you have done if you discovered the truth this late in life? Would you confront it or walk away in silence? And have you ever seen trust used as a tool for control? Please share your thoughts in the comments. The final conversation with Richard didn't happen the way I imagined it would for years. There was no shouting, no tears, no dramatic collapse at the doorway. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, which somehow made it more powerful. I asked him to meet me in a quiet cafe near the courthouse, a neutral place where neither of us could pretend we were at home. He arrived late, as usual, older now, but still carrying that same confidence that once made me feel safe and small at the same time. He smiled politely, like we were distant acquaintances. That smile told me everything. He had already moved on emotionally. This meeting was just another task for him. I didn't waste time. I told him I wasn't there to argue or relive the past. I told him I was there to close a door he had left open in my soul for too long. He looked relieved, thinking this would be easy. Then I spoke. I told him I knew the full truth, about the risk, about his resentment, about how he had chosen convenience over honesty. I told him that what hurt most wasn't losing the chance to have a child, but losing my right to decide. I explained calmly how that choice had shaped every year of my life afterward, how I had blamed my body, my age, my worth, while he quietly prepared an exit. For the first time, he looked uncomfortable. He tried to justify himself, saying he had done what he thought was best at the time. I stopped him. I told him that best for you is not the same as best for us. I told him I was done carrying his guilt, his excuses, and his unfinished apologies. Then I did something unexpected. I thanked him. He looked confused. I thanked him for revealing who he truly was before I wasted the rest of my life hoping he would change. I thanked him for teaching me, painfully but clearly, that love without respect is just control wearing a friendly face. And I told him that I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. That forgiveness wasn't soft. It was firm. It was a boundary. I stood up, wished him well, and walked away without looking back. My hands were steady. My heart was quiet. For the first time in decades, I felt taller. The weeks that followed were not magically perfect. Healing didn't erase the scars. There were mornings I woke up grieving the child I never held. There were nights I mourned the woman I might have been if I had trusted myself sooner. But the difference was this: I no longer blamed myself. Therapy helped me untangle years of silence. I learned that being agreeable is not the same as being loved. I learned that sacrifice should never cost you your voice. I learned that boundaries are not punishment, they are protection. I rebuilt my life slowly. I traveled alone. I redecorated my small apartment exactly the way I wanted, without asking anyone's opinion. I made friends who knew me as I was now, not as someone's wife. I laughed more. I rested without guilt. Most importantly, I began sharing my story with younger women, not to scare them, but to arm them with truth. I told them to ask hard questions, to listen to discomfort, to never let fear, money, or love pressure them into decisions that silence their instincts. I told them that a partner who truly loves you will never ask you to disappear for their comfort. Today, at 59, I no longer measure my worth by what my body could or could not do. I measure it by my resilience, my honesty, and my courage to start again when the truth finally arrived. I am not broken. I was misled, and there is a difference. If I could give one piece of sage advice to younger women, it would be this: never outsource your choices. Love should support your future, not quietly steal it. Trust is sacred, but it must be mutual. And if someone asks you to sacrifice your voice for peace, understand that peace built on silence will always collapse. I am Emily. I survived betrayal disguised as love, and I am finally free. Have you ever experienced betrayal like this, or seen someone you love go through something similar? What would you have done differently in my situation? Please share your story and your thoughts in the comments.